So this is horrible, but this is part 3 of chapter 23. It says that the Laxman didn't think about their mom's cells or the cancer tests, but Lawrence was working full-time on the railroad and living in a house filled with children. Zachariah was still in jail, and times had gotten tough for Sonny, who was now busy selling drugs. But Deborah couldn't stop worrying. She was terrified that if she might have cancer, and was consumed with the idea that researchers had done and still were doing horrible things to her mom. She heard stories about Hopkins snatching black people for research, and she'd read an article in Jet about the Tuskegee study and suggested that doctors injected the men with syphilis in order to study them. The injection of disease-causing organisms into unaware human subjects had occurred before in American medical science, the article explained. It was done 8 years ago in New York City by Dr. Chester Southam, a cancer specialist who was injecting live cells into chronically ill elderly patients. Again, this is page 186, sorry. Deborah started wondering if instead of testing the Lax children for cancer, McKusick and Sue were actually injecting them with the same bad blood that had killed their mom. She started asking Day a lot of questions about Henrietta. How did she get sick? What happened when she died? What did those doctors do to her? The answer seemed to confirm her fears. Day told her that Henrietta hadn't seemed sick at all. He said he took her into Hopkins and they started doing treatments, and then her stomach turned black as coal and she died. Sadie said the same thing, and so did all the other cousins. But when she asked what type of cancer her mom had, the treatments her doctor gave her, what part of her was still alive, the family still had no answers. So when one of the McKusick's assistants called Deborah and asked her to come to Hopkins to give more blood, she went, thinking if her family couldn't answer questions about her mother, maybe scientists could. She didn't know the blood was for a researcher in California who wanted samples for his own HeLa research. And she didn't know why McKusick's assistant was calling her and not her brothers. She figured it was because the problem her mother had didn't affect boys. She still thought she was being tested for cancer. This is page 187 at the top. Deborah went into McKusick's office to give more blood June 26, 1974, 4 days before the new federal law went into effect, requiring Institutional Review Board approval and informed consent for all federally funded research. The new law, published in the Federal Register 1 month earlier, applied to subjects at risk, meaning any individual who is exposed to the possibility of injury, including physical, psychological, or social injury, was a consequence of the participation as a subject. But what constituted injury and risk was heavily debated. Numerous researchers had appealed to HEW, asking that a collection of blood and tissues be exempt from the new law. After all, doctors had been drawing blood for centuries for diagnostic testing, for aside from the pain of a needle stick, there seemed to be no risk. But HEW did not exempt those procedures. In fact, it later clarified the law to specifically include them. McKusick's research on the Lax family coincided with the beginning of a new era of genetic research in which the concept of risk to patients would change completely. With the ability to identify genes from a blood sample or a single cell, the risk of blood draw was no longer a minor infection or the pain of a needle stick. It was that someone could uncover your genetic information. It was about violation of privacy. So Deborah met McKusick only once, and then she went into Hopkins to give blood. He shook her hand and said that Henrietta had made an important contribution to science. Then she bombarded him with questions. What made her mom sick? What part of her is still living? What did that mean? What did Henrietta do for science? What are these blood tests he was doing, meaning that Deborah was going to die young like her mother? McKusick did not explain why he was having someone draw blood from Deborah. Instead, he told her about Henrietta's cells being used for the polio vaccine and genetic research. He said they'd gone up in early space missions and had been used in atomic bomb testing. Deborah heard those things and imagined her mother on the moon and being blown up by bombs. She was terrified and couldn't stop wondering if the parts of her mother they were using in research could actually feel the things scientists were doing to them. When she asked McKusick to explain more about cells, he gave her a book he edited called Medical Genetics, which would become one of the most important textbooks in the field. He said it would tell her everything she needed to know, and then he autographed the inside front cover. What a narcissist. Like me, I would need someone to draw it out and explain it like a good teacher would. Beneath his signature, he wrote a phone number and told her to use it for making appointments to give more blood. McKusick flipped to the second page of the introduction. There, between graphs of disease specific infant mortality and a description of the homozygous state of Garrodian inborn errors was a photograph of Henrietta with her hands on her hips. He pointed to the paragraph that mentioned her. And basically it just says all this stuff came from Henrietta Lacks. The book was filled with complicated sentences explaining Henrietta's cells by saying its atypical histology may correlate with the unusually malignant behavior of the carcinoma, and something about the correlate of the tumor's singularity. Reading magazines took Deborah a long time because she had to stop often to look words up in the dictionary. Now she sat in the clinic, gripping McCusick's book, not even trying to read the words. All she could think of was that she had seen the photograph of her mom before. What happened to her to make her end up here, she wondered. A reader of this would think McCusick should be asking for Deborah's autograph and should be begging to ask to explain the whole how Henrietta's cells help science. Like, he shouldn't be giving her an autograph. I can't even believe that. Day swore, I'm at the top of 189. Day swore he never had given it to McCusick or any of Henrietta's doctors. This is how somebody got the picture. Deborah's brothers swore they hadn't either. The only thing Day could figure was that maybe Howard Jones had asked Henrietta for a picture and then stuck it in her medical record. But as far as Day knew, no one ever asked permission to publish it. When I talked to McCusick several years before his death in 2008, he was 79 and still conducting research and training young scientists. He didn't recall where he got in the photo, but he imagined Henrietta's family must have given it to Howard Jones or another doctor at Hopkins. And though McCusick remembered the research he conducted on the Lacks family, he didn't remember meeting Deborah or giving her his book. He said he never had first contact with the family. He'd given that up to Sue. When I talked to Susan Sue, now I remember she's the Chinese researcher, now a director of medical genetics at American Red Cross, she told me that working with McCusick on HeLa cells was a highlight of her career. I'm very proud, she told me. I probably will Xerox those papers and tell my kids this is important. But when I explained to her that the Laxes thought she was testing them for cancer and that they were upset about scientists using the cells without their knowledge, she was shocked. I feel very bad, she said. People should have told them, we never thought at the time they didn't understand. And remember, Susan Sue was just like a lay person. Like if I was going to send you a letter, like Susan is the postmaster. Like she was just doing a job, like collecting the blood like she was told. She probably figured McCusick had explained to the family and gotten consent. She also told me that she had a message she hoped to give to the Lacks family when I talk with them next. Just tell them I'm very grateful, she said. They should be very proud of the mother and the wife. I think that if they're angry, they probably don't realize how famous the cells are in the world. It's an unfortunate thing what happened. They should still be very proud. Their mom will never die as long as science is around. She will always be such a famous thing. Toward the end of our conversation, Sue mentioned that she could learn much more from testing the family's blood today, since DNA technology had advanced so much since the 70s. And then she asked me if I'd tell the Lacks family one more thing for her. If they're willing, I wouldn't mind to go back and get some more blood. Well, if I was a Lacks family, I wouldn't give you anything. Not Susan specifically, but yeah, scientists don't deserve any more of that.